Good morning, everybody. We're going to start the Finance Committee meeting on February 16th. It is now 8:03. Our first agenda item, we're going to discuss our 2023-24 financing plan, and we're going to start that agenda with a presentation from PFM, our financial advisors. So I'm going to kick it over to Jamie Doyle.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Good.
Wonderful. So also with me this morning is my colleague, Carly Kiesling.
Good morning.
And we always like to start off talking a little bit about the market and the interest rate environment. So if you look at page 1 of our handout, you'll see 3 snapshots of the same index. This is the MMD curve, which stands for Municipal Marketplace Data. And what the top snapshot tells us is the yield curve's inverted, meaning the rate is higher in years 1 and 2 and 3, and then you see it goes lower in some of these out years, and then it comes back up again. But this is a good thing because it means on the short end, where you invest at short-term rates, it means you're actually earning something on your investments these days, and it's something meaningful. You know, a liquid Pliget rate these days is about a 4.75. So, you know, that's been unheard of for the last 12 plus years when you were earning next to nothing. So that's a real positive. And especially as you're thinking about borrowing money for a capital improvement program, that also means you'll be, you know, earning, you know, equal to or greater than the rate at which you would borrow for the project. So that's also a positive. As you look out the yield curve, you can see we're at the blue line and we're below historic averages. And that sometimes takes people by surprise because there's certainly no shortage of negative economic news out there. And if you look at the middle snapshot of this index, going all the way back to 1993, it gives you a more historic perspective. And you can see on the far right that interest rates have been trending downward. We blew up that red box on the right, and that's the final chart. So you can really get a bird's eye view of what has happened in calendar year 22 as rates trended up. And basically since November, they've been trending downward in your favor. So that's just a brief snapshot of what's been going on in the market. You know, there's a good segment of the market that thinks the Federal Reserve Committee that controls the very short-term overnight lending rate is overshooting the mark, and that they'll actually need to decrease the Fed funds rate by the end of the calendar year. So that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. As we look at the next page, page 2, this is your debt portfolio. So if you do nothing new, you would continue to make the payments on this page. As always, the top half is gross debt service, meaning principal and interest on your various issues. And the bottom half is your local share because you receive state reimbursement from the grandfathered PlanCon program to varying degrees on all of your issues down below. You can see that line labeled PE percentage. That's the percentage eligible on each of your issues. And we continue to monitor your debt portfolio for refunding opportunities. You may recall last calendar year, 2022, we had a refunding plan. You know, we successfully accomplished the series of 2022, which was a refunding of the 2016 A's. And we were also, the original plan called for us to refund your 2017 bonds there in column 24. And then the market moved away from us and we were not able to accomplish the refunding of the 2017s. They do not work at today's rate. We continue to monitor them. You actually have about a 2.68% locked in on those 2017 bonds. So it's a really low rate to begin with, which is a good thing. The important column on this page is column 30, your local annual share that's the net effect on your budget each year. And you'll see column 30 when we look at the next page in a minute, because we take your existing debt structure and then determine how to structure new debt for your capital improvement program. So you can see in column 30, you're pretty level. I'll call that $7.8 million. And then you have your first little drop off in 2030, and then it continues to drop off as you look down column 30. And you have a pretty nice, short, concise debt portfolio inside of the 20-year mark, which is not always common in Pennsylvania school districts in today's day and age. We've been in Act 1 since 2006, and we've watched school district debt portfolios grow longer and longer due to the constraints of Act 1. So if we look at page 3, this is a scenario to borrow $30 million. And you'll see that it's split into 3 steps or 3 borrowings over 3 different calendar years. And the reason for that is $10 million or less per calendar year in the IRS's eyes gets you a lower bank qualified interest rate and gets you a shorter 5-year call feature, both of which are advantageous and give you more flexibility over the life of the loan. So that's why you see these broken into $10 million increments. The first one, you see settlement April of 2023 for this analysis, and they're all wraparound structures. So what that means, as we move a little further down the page, column 6 is your do nothing column. It matches up to the prior page. So if you do nothing, you'll keep making the net payments in column 6. Column 7 is an estimate of what the debt service would look like on this first $10 million if you did that in pretty short order here in 2023. So you can see the payments start off smaller. I'll call that $550,000 a year until your debt in column 6 starts to drop off. And then ultimately, when the larger drop-offs happen, we start to fill in with more principal on the new 10 million, hence the wraparound concept. Because by state law, you have to have overall, meaning all your old debt and any new debt, overall level or declining debt service in order to get DCED approval on each issue as you issue it. So that's the wraparound concept, and the school district has used that many, many times in the past. Then we'd come back and we'd have this same discussion in 2024 to make sure, everything was going well with your projects and, sizing and timing. We'd update the interest rate market at that point in time, and we'd have the same discussion on the second 10 million, which you see in the blue column. So same concept with the wraparound. You see the principal and interest payments are smaller up front until the drop-offs happen in your old debt, and then we fill in with larger payments. And then finally, the third 10 million in the orangish yellow column, you can see that debt service coming on board. You see it's a nice phase in. That's one of the other benefits of this $10 million per calendar year. It phases more gradually into your budget. And we've designed it so they all end at the same point in time. A wraparound determines its own final maturity based on what your existing debt portfolio looks like. But we've designed it so they all end at the same point in time so that no one issue has more interest rate risk than another. Because, obviously the last issue is the one that has the most interest rate risk because that's the furthest away in time. So if you did these 3 steps in this timing and in these amounts, what you'd be left with at the end of the day, column 10 just subtotals the 3 steps so you can see the new local effort. Column 11 adds in your old local effort and the new local effort in dollars, and then column 12 is the millage equivalent. And again, we tried to keep that smooth and level so that it's manageable as you deal with other things in your regular operating budget as well. This millage would be just for this potential $30 million borrowings.
Jamie, before you go to the next slide, I want to jump in so that I can give a little bit of a background because I also have a presentation that piggybacks on this. So for the committee members that were not part of property committee, I wanted to kind of give you some insight on why we are presenting this option. And it looks like, why would we be doing a $10 million borrowing in 2023? So at the property committee meeting, that was, relayed at the last board meeting, there were some summer projects that were presented that needed to be done. And they're as well as the middle school, looking at architect design for the middle school for some renovations. So there's 3 projects slated to be done that was given the green light by the property committee. That's the middle school athletic improvements. And I did send my slides out. So if you do have access to those, that's the second slide there. And the scope of work on that is improving the track. We talked about rubberizing the track. We're going to do some improvements to the football and field hockey fields. And that total cost for that project is about $1.3 million. The second project is the high school partial roof replacement. As you recall, we talked about 100,000 square feet of the roof will be out of warranty. So we're going to start with 40,000 square feet this summer, because that's the extent that we can do without disrupting school and students. So that cost is about $1.9 million. And then the third project that's slated for the summer is the Erdenheim Elementary exterior ADA ramp. That will provide ADA access from the top parking lot at Erdenheim to the lower levels. That cost is about $500,000. So looking at those 3 projects alone, without anything else going on or any other discussions, we're looking at a hefty price tag that cannot be funded 100% or would deplete our capital reserve fund, which also we use our capital reserve fund for our bus purchases. So in looking at that, we had talked about what our options were in order to be able to pay for these projects and then the ongoing projects, because next summer we're going to have to address the other part of the roof at the high school that is out of warranty, and that's about 60,000 square feet. So that price tag is going to be a little bit higher than the $2 million that we have this summer. So the thought process is that we would do a borrowing this year of $10 million that would allow us to address those 3 projects, also address the second phase of the high school roof project, and then start the process of the middle school renovations. As you'll recall, we got the green light to go ahead and RFP for an architect to be able to design that project. So that kind of starts the ball rolling on that project, so to speak. So between the 10 million, it'll be over those 3 projects, the phase 2 of the high school roof, and then the start of the middle school renovation project. And then determining, what I asked Jamie to do was to give us a $30 million scenario over these 3 years. Obviously at this point, we don't know what the middle school renovation is going to look like or what the price tag is on it, but this gives us a good idea of what a $30 million borrowing for all these projects are going to be over the next 3 years. So I wanted to make sure that everybody on the call here understood why we're presenting this. This was our financing piece as a follow-up to the property committee. Is that clear for everybody?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
no
you.
problem. And I just wanted to stop Jamie because there's going to be action items in the March board meeting. So before we got to the action items, I wanted to make sure that we are very clear on why we are presenting this right now. So I will turn this back over to Jamie.
Thank you. And, you know, to your point, Kara, it sounds like the timing of your projects that you're starting is good timing. I would just remind everybody that the IRS does not let us borrow tax exempt money just because interest rates are below historic averages. There's a 3-pronged test, and the keywords are reasonable expectations. So at the time of each borrowing, it's a separate test. You must have reasonable expectations that you can spend 85% of the borrowed proceeds within 3 years. So that would be 85% of this first 10 million that we're really talking about at this point in time. The second prong of the test is that you have reasonable expectations that within 6 months of settlement, you can enter into a substantial binding obligation to spend at least 5%. That's usually your architect's contract or engineering contract, or, you know, one of those upfront types of contracts as you're engaging the professionals to develop the project. And then the third prong of the test is just that you proceed with due diligence. So you seem right in line with all of that. I don't see any issues with that. And, you know, just to kind of jump to the bottoms of column 12, the total millage, if you did all 30 million, and again, we're really only talking about this first 10 million today, because we'd be back to have this exact same conversation for any later borrowings, but the millage equivalent total is 1.29 mils. And I would just also point out, even if you decide to do this full 30 million or more or less, you know, that's something you'll decide as you see how things go along the way. This 30 million still, you know, caps out really inside of 20 years. So you still have a fairly short, concise debt portfolio, even if you undertake this 30 million. You have a lot of flexibility that you would preserve for the future. The other thing I want to point out in column 11 is we didn't wrap tight on purpose to leave you some flexibility for the future. So you see in 2030, you still have a bit of a drop off. In 2031, you still have a bit of a drop off. So we've left some drop offs in here in the event that you have other future capital needs that you'd like to address. So this plan has a ton of flexibility embedded in it. The last page, as Kara mentioned, there's a sample motion for your consideration if or when you'd like to authorize the finance team to proceed with that first 10 million. The finance team, as always, consists of PFM as your financial advisor, Fox Rothschild as your bond counsel, and your local solicitor as well. And you can see the timeline. All these dates say or later after them, but usually boards like to know, you know, the fastest they can move. You can always slow this down, you know, for whatever reason, you know, whether it's a market related reason or a project related reason. But today's an initial presentation. If you were so inclined to pass the motion above at your March 7th voting meeting, that would authorize the finance team to proceed. We'd be back with the paperwork in order for your March 21st voting meeting with a parameters resolution. And just a reminder what a parameters resolution is. It's a resolution that then once you pass it, the main point of it is to give you flexibility so that we can enter the market on the best day and not be wed to a board meeting date, which might be, you know, once or twice a month. So those parameters resolutions, they include a maximum principal amount, which for a roughly $10 million borrowing, the resolution will say 12 million. And the reason for that is to get DCED approval, I need to be able to resize the amortization schedule after we get the winning bid. So I need to be able to move principal around in order to get the debt structure that we want. So, you know, under no circumstances will we ever issue more than $9,995,000, but the resolution will be for $12 million in order to provide that flexibility so I can resize. It'll contain a maximum interest rate, and that will likely be 6%, not because I think you're going to get 6%, but again, it's for that flexibility so that the winning bid, it might have premium bonds, it might have discount bonds, it might have par bonds. We need to build the resolution with enough flexibility to accommodate any bid. And then the final parameter is just a maximum final maturity date, and that's the easy one because we know what we want that final maturity date to be. If that resolution is passed March 21st, we'd be in a position to lock in interest rates and have your competitive internet auction as early as March 28th. And then that would lead to settlement around the end of April, meaning the money would show up in your construction fund deposit, start earning interest, you know, until you spend it, and be available to pay invoices. So I will pause there and entertain any questions that you may have at this time.
I have a question. Thank you for the really comprehensive overview. It makes a lot of sense. I seem to remember us talking about these borrowings in the past. And so I just wanted to confirm, Kara, that this is consistent with how we have borrowed as a district, that we aren't, you know, this isn't a new or different tactic or strategy that we've used.
That is correct. This is consistent with how previous borrowings has happened, and I will get Jamie to confirm that.
I can attest that this is the way the district's done it, at least for the last 26 years that I've been working with the district.
I have a follow-up question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, that's good. That confirms what I had thought. Thank you.
So as a follow-up for that, just so I can understand understand better as a newer board member. Just what has the process been then when the district takes out these loans of how we pay it off, right? Because it's not a business, we're not generating new income or revenue through new streams, or maybe we are, but Ms. Green, I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about where the revenue comes from to be able to pay off when we take out loans.
Sure. So, Jamie, if you want to go back up to that sheet, there you go. So we're looking at, if you look at column 7, 8, 9, and this will segue nicely into the budget update that we have. When you look at those numbers there for the first year of each borrowing. So if you look at column 7, that line of 575,333. That is the estimated amount that will have to be added, or new money that needs to be found within our budget in order to pay for this bond. And then in subsequent years, you'll see the 570 and the 570 in the blue and the gold. So that what happens there is that becomes part of the budget process, where if new monies are identified that need to be found, then that needs to either be smoothed with, it could be via a tax increase, it could be that some of our revenues are trending up, and we'll have this conversation after this presentation so you'll better understand that. Or it's we cut expenditures, or we use fund balance. So it's part of the budget process on how we pay for this, but the key part of this is that it's new money that needs to be found within our budget and identified within our budget, and how that's paid for is a multiple of ways on how budget is presented. Does that clarify your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think my other questions that are probably I'll wait for the next part of the presentation.
Okay.
And Kara, if I could also piggyback, and I'm probably jumping way ahead into the same presentation, but this is all going to fall in line with our goal of remaining below the Act 1 indexes. I know you're always on top of that, so I hate to ask an obvious question, but at the same time, just
no, absolutely, and that's why we're doing a high level of where we are in the budget. The big presentation is March 9th with the overall budget, but we wanted to make sure that you understood in seeing that, these aren't small numbers that we're talking about. So I can understand saying, okay, that's great that we need this, but how are we paying for it? So there are some things that are trending that I think in the next presentation you will see on the revenue side, on where we land. And yes, that is always our goal, is to make sure that we are not above index and that we do everything we can to come below index with our budget presentation and our tax increase for the budget year.
great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Jamie?
No, my question not specifically for Jamie's, so I'll wait.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, so there will be no board motion coming up at the next meeting, the February 21st meeting, but there will be 2 board motions at the March meetings, as Jamie indicated. So I wanted to make sure that we were okay with that, on proceeding with the $10 million borrowing, so that we're just focusing right now on column 7. Any subsequent borrowings that we will have an exact presentation just like this, and make sure that the numbers are updated and we communicate with that. We're just not writing a blank check for Jamie to go ahead and borrow $30 million at will for the district. It'll always come in front of this committee when we're doing our sections of the borrowings. So right now we're just focusing on column 7, looking at the $10 million in order to pay for the projects that I indicated, and then start the process for the middle school renovation. Is everybody on this committee okay with the 2 motions and us proceeding with that?
Sounds good to me.
Yes.
I'm good with it. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate it. And Carly, thank you for joining us and for the presentation.
Thank you. And if any questions do arise, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to provide answers. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Okay, so I am gonna screen share here. And I just want to make sure that everybody can see my screen. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Kara, can you hit the use slideshow button at the top, please? That'll make it a simpler display.
Okay,
Thank you.
yep. And I'm gonna move this so that I'm not. There we go. So this was the slide that I was reading off of, talking about the projects that we are looking to do this summer, that was discussed in the property committee. So you'll see the scope, and I just took this right off the slide that for the board members that were there, Dewey, Henry from Dewey Engineering, he did the presentation and had the nice drawings and all the stuff. So I just really, took this and kind of summarized it so that the finance committee could piggyback off of the presentation that Jamie just did. So you'll look again, the middle school athletic improvements are about 1.3 when you round them. And I broke it down between estimated construction cost and estimated soft cost. If you're not familiar with soft costs, those are like our architect cost, our construction management cost. Those can change. They're usually a percentage of the project, and that's how they're determined. So you'll see little asterisks by all the estimated soft costs for the 3 projects. What you're going to see brought forward on Tuesday that came out of property committee is that Dewey Engineering, they will have their contract amounts for approval at that meeting. And those amounts are included in those asterisk amounts on each of those projects. Does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to see some numbers that are coming forward on Tuesday. I just don't want you to be have sticker shock that this was folded into the project cost that has been presented at both of these meetings. And again, the intent is for the first $10 million borrowing, we're going to capture all these costs plus phase 2 of the high school roof. Plus, we're going to start the process of the middle school renovation architect design. So that'll be the first 10 million that we're talking about. And then as we start to get through the conversations of the middle school renovation, that will determine what other type of borrowings that we'll need to address that project. So I think at the property committee meeting, there was a lot of questions on how are we paying for this? And I just said to be continued, and this is the presentation that addresses that.
Can I ask a quick question about this slide, or would you prefer that we wait till the end
No,
of your?
that's fine.
I was just curious from the property committee, if you could just give us a little more context. How were these identified as the most imminent projects? And I'm also curious because I don't have a sense of kind of the scale over the next 5 or so years, what other major things are needed in the district and how these rose to the top as the like must be this, within the next few years.
Absolutely. So I can speak on it, and if Dr. Yannicone, if you want to jump in at all from the conversations that we've had with not only property, but with you, Craig, and myself. But the first project came because we had talked about taking a look at the middle school track and possibly making it a regulation size track and rubberizing it. So that's how the conversation came up with the middle school athletic improvements. What we found was there was some safety concerns about the field hockey fields because of the bumpiness of the fields. So included in this scope of work is going to be replacing the track with rubberized surface. We will be doing some upgrades to the football field for the same reason, to make sure that it's smoothed out. There's some other upgrades where we're doing we're replacing the goalposts. There's some concrete bleachers. We're doing some ADA work for the sidewalk. And then I said, I think the biggest field that is the safety issue is the field hockey field. So we're smoothing that out and resodding that and seeding that to make sure that it's safe for playing. The high school roof replacement that came about because we have 100,000 square feet that is coming out of warranty, which you never want on a roof, just like the middle school and just like the bus depot. So once we get this high school roof replacement done, all of our roofs in our buildings will be under warranty for the next X number of years. So anything will be covered. This first part that was identified because it's taking care of the parts of the roof in the high school that have the biggest leaks or the most leaks. So that's how that 40,000 square feet were identified. And then, like I said, the other 60,000 square feet will be done in phase 2. The reason why we're not doing it all at once is because we wouldn't be able to get it done during the summer because of the sheer volume of it, and it would disrupt school. So we want to make sure that we split it up in 2 sections in order to have the least disruption to students. The Erdenheim Elementary ADA ramp, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the back end of Erdenheim. How this came about is that you have those big that steep set of stairs. Number one, there's no ADA access from the lower to the upper playground lot, so that was looked at. And there was a little bit of revisions done for this from the original drawings to make it so that there's ADA access coming from, I believe, the cafeteria area down to the lower area back in the side of Erdenheim. So this is an ADA issue that I think rose to the top of being pressing for projects. The middle school renovation, we talked about that. That's embedded in our district goals about a recommendation on doing some improvements or upgrades at the middle school. We are in the very early stages of that. Right now we're working on the RFP for architect design. So we have not picked our architect. Architects have not designed anything at this point. There's been conversations and some research, and I don't know if Dr. Yannicone wants to talk any more about the middle school because she's been involved in that heavily.
Of course, I'd be happy to. But I want to just, in a general overview for Ms. Hughes and all the members of the committee. So Craig Thorne is our Director of Operations, maintains short and long-term facilities related goals. He meets regularly with Ms. Green and periodically with me to be able to review where we should be prioritizing our efforts. And there's really 3 primary considerations. The first is always safety. So we're always doing an assessment of our facilities and grounds to determine the extent to which our areas are safe. So as an example, if we see something that we believe is a hindrance, for example, we brought forward the cameras because we felt that that was a safety concern. And that came out of facilities and through the property committee. That'll always go first. The second is accessibility. And we have been really working to try to retrofit our buildings because we've had a number of issues related to older aging buildings that were designed at a time that accessibility was not what it is today in newer buildings. And so the Erdenheim project is an example of that retrofitting, where originally there wasn't either full consideration of or even awareness of the accessibility issues between the lunchroom and the playgrounds, the parking lot, and the lower level of the building. And then the last is functionality. So with regard to the middle school athletic improvements, both the athletic improvements for this summer and the middle school renovation, we're really looking at the extent to which our facilities are properly supporting our educational programs. So as an example with the athletic improvements, the rubberized surface is absolutely a safer surface and a more functional surface than the one we currently have as macadam, which is much more common in older facilities. When it comes to functionality, we're also adding a shot put circle, which has a cost associated with it. And that's about making sure that our middle schoolers in track and field don't have to travel to the high school in order to participate in that practice. When it comes to the renovations and the additions, we're really looking at, in a cycle, we've already reviewed the high school and had renovations and additions there. Prior to that, we had the Erdenheim renovations and additions, and then obviously the new Enfield building several years ago. So in our conversations, we've been looking at ongoing maintenance rather than deferred maintenance. And so the middle school renovation is the next step in the process of continuing to maintain and upgrade our facilities so that they stay up with the times with regard to the function and purpose of, you know, the design and the layout of our buildings. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you. I think it was especially good to hear the kind of rubric that's used by your staff and you to assess these decisions. So I mean, I have full faith in you all in these, but I think it's just helpful to know the context of how you arrived at these items. And so yeah, thank you. for that. One other follow-up question I had, just out of curiosity, when things are at regulation, then that means we can hold competitions here, or you know, like, is that a revenue stream? Like, does the district get money if we host like a?
Not really.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
it really isn't a factor for us. It would be wonderful if we could have had a 400-meter track at the middle school as we do at the high school. It would have, and we discussed this at property, but it would have eliminated one of the 3 fields. So we use every inch of those practice fields, and the township does as well in some of our organizations, soccer and lacrosse organizations. So it's really important that we try to maintain all the fields. In the property committee, you also asked about the long-term goals. So ultimately, we would like to upgrade all of the middle school athletic fields that exist right there along Paper Mill Road. But we are waiting on those closest to Route 309 because we anticipate that we're going to need a staging area when we do move forward with a renovation and addition project at the middle school. And that staging area may have a short-term negative impact on that outer field, the baseball field, and the basketball courts just adjacent to the gym. So we're concentrating on the area closer to Bergen Road, because we feel like we can avoid using that as a staging area and won't be wasting funds and then having to redo. So we feel like we can safely do that end of the fields and not have to touch it during a renovation addition project. And then the other area that isn't here, but in subsequent conversations we'll have over the next 2 years, I think the board's aware that we're working at a goal of having a new bus depot location or an upgraded existing bus depot if we can't find a new location. And there will be costs associated with that we may need to utilize future borrowing to be able to support, in addition to the renovation addition of the middle school project. So those are I would say our 3 to 5 year goals are the middle school renovation addition, continued improvement and enhancement of the existing fields at the middle school, and the bus depot.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so our next agenda item is I'm going to do a budget update for the 23-24 budget. Again, as I said, our next meeting, March 9th, will be the full presentation of the budget. But I wanted to, we wanted to make sure that with this borrowing opportunity that we have, and we're talking about introducing new money into the budget, that there was some understanding on why we felt comfortable to bring this forward at this point in time. So with our budget, we go through our guiding principles. This is just a repeat slide that we always show on why we are creating our budget and the guiding principles for developing it. The budget process timeline where we're at right now is February 16th. I'm giving you a budget update. The full budget will be presented at March 9th committee meeting. We're looking at having another committee meeting April 20th, which will be the proposed final budget that'll be presented to the committee, with the intent to have that adopted by the board at the May 2nd board meeting, with final budget being adopted June 6th. You might notice that this is a little bit earlier than we're used to adopting budget, but I pushed up the timeline a little bit to give us flexibility, because we have until June 30th that if anything were to happen with the state budget or anything else that we would need some time, that would give us another meeting before June 30th in order to adopt the final budget. So that's why this timeline is presented the way it is. This is a slide that is also a repeater slide, but I think it's a great slide that shows since 2015-16, when Act 1 was introduced, the Act 1 index versus where our tax increases have been. So to Mr. DeFranco's point, we have historically not increased taxes above index, and we've come in below index, and that has always been a budgetary goal when we're creating our budget. So you'll see that our Act 1 index this year is 4.1%. Just a little background, and you'll see the projected numbers have gone up since I've last updated this slide, that they're projecting an increase of 4.5 flexibility for next year, and then the subsequent years out 4 and 3.8. One of the factors that are contributing to this, and you'll see it's also contributing to some of our revenue increase, is that part of the calculation is based upon statewide average salaries of elementary and secondary education. As you know, with the inflation rates, with the pandemic, with everything happening, and the job market and the teacher shortage, it's very competitive right now. So as contracts are getting settled, as employers are increasing wages to retain and recruit people and employees, those wages increase. That impacts the calculation for the Act 1 index. So that's why you're seeing that it's trending up slightly. That's a contributing factor to that. Okay. So I wanted to show you what drives revenue, my revenue budget planning. So the big chunk is local revenue, and real estate taxes or property taxes take up about 90% of that. So there are some things that go into the calculation of our real estate tax revenue. There are things that can naturally make it go up or make it go down without even touching millage or increasing taxes. That's our total overall assessment value. So that is all the property value within Springfield Township. We had a 1.96% increase from last year. So it was 1.32. So we went up to 1.34, which is a very positive thing. There was some development that properties went up and got built and homeowners moved in. So the assessment went on the books. There's also, with the housing market, there has been a lot of real estate selling. So that has contributed to our overall assessment value going up, which is a good thing. Also, that's in that is school districts play a big part of assessment and property value. So I think that's also something that we need to make sure that we acknowledge, is that the strength of our school district goes into the assessment value of property. The other piece is the collection rate. And looking at the prior trend, we were at about 97%, and we're up this year to 98 to 98.5%. That could be a couple factors. We did have a change in tax collectors. I will tell you that Mrs. Kleinerman did a really, really good job. Sam did a great job working with her. And when we balanced, we were off 2 checks that were identifiable. So it was less than $10,000 that there was a variance that we addressed immediately. So the record keeping got tightened up, and I believe our township pays their property taxes, and there's very little delinquency. So that's also a contributing factor that increases our tax collections. And then the allowable millage rate, you'll see that it's 1.4891 mils, and that would be if we raise to the 4.1%. That would generate about $1.9 million of additional revenue. So on top of that revenue, regardless of where our tax increase comes in at, we naturally saw some increases in our tax revenue because our assessment rate went up and our collection rate went up. So that's one pocket of money that the question came up of, will we be able to absorb the $500,000 of the new borrowing? Because of this trend with our property taxes, that's a yes. The second part of that was our earned income tax revenue. We've been trending, districts usually trend about 2.5% in their EIT collections. What I'll say is you'll see this 5-year historical trend reflects about a 38% increase in 17-18. I did a double look at that. I talked to Berkheimer, which is our collection agency for EIT, and it's the same thing. We have experienced an increase, and I think this is not just unique to Springfield. It's across, I think all districts, is because employers have had to raise the amount of money that they're paying employees in order to either get them hired or to retain them. That positively impacts our earned income tax collection money that gets put in, because that's directly impacted by wages. Does that make sense to everybody on why that number is trending up? So again, we were trending about 3.5 million. Last year, our final audited number was 4. So I anticipate, I'm waiting on a final report for them that I'll have by the March 9th meeting to see where their estimates put us in for the end of this year going into next year. So I'm thinking it's going to be about 4.2 million. So that, again, that's some positive income on the local level. Other local revenue, which is little numbers, that historical trend reflects about 0.5% to 1% annual increase. Somewhere that we were positive this year that has hit us in the past because of the pandemic and because of interest rates was our interest earnings. That is now trending back up because of the rates that are being increased. So we are doing a great job of making sure that our money is invested and that we're capitalizing off of interest rates and where they're at right now. So that's trend up. At the state and federal level, that is really dependent on the state budget. Governor Shapiro is delivering that budget March of 2023. I always do this. I'm conservative with state because you never know. I don't anticipate they're going to take money away from us, especially with the information coming from the next slides. But I just always utilize what we received this year. So the current budget year is what I put in for next year. So if that number goes up, then that's a windfall of revenues that we have. We did receive an increase from 21-22 to 22-23. So that was a positive. On the federal side, the historical trend reflects a flatline funding, but we still have the ESSER dollars that we are utilizing, and I did not fix this, but it's September 30th of 2024 is when we have we can spend that too. Just as a quick recap, we had our cybersecurity that we spent from that. Some flexible furniture at the high school in a couple of areas, and we added the 4 positions, the 2 math specialists and 2 special ed teachers. So that's how our ESSER funds are being utilized, and they continue to be utilized. And Dr. Yannicone, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Lutz, myself, and Sam are constantly conversating about that to make sure that we maximize those dollars and make sure they're used by the deadline. So what drives the expenditure budget planning? Salary and benefits, that's a big part. You'll see that kind of fixed costs are the bulk of our budget. So salary and benefits take up about 72. We are in a service area, so you would count on that to be a big part of your budget. The good thing is that we have all of our contracts settled. So there's no guessing, there's no going into this budget year uncertain of where our costs are. So that is a really, really good thing. Our health insurance rates came in pretty stabilized. It wasn't a big spike. Emily and myself have a meeting tomorrow to look at our second look rates, and then we'll make a decision on how we want to move forward with that. But again, there's no big spike in our insurance rates that would cause for some alarm. Another surprising thing that came out of the certification of PSERS is it actually decreased. So this is the first time since I have been in school finance in my 14 years that I've ever seen PSERS go down. So that is a positive thing. It was 35.26. So it went down to 34. That is a positive thing. So then we'll have some room in our budget there. Because that number will come down as with our, and it's dependent upon our salaries. Debt service, you saw that Jamie gave that presentation of our overall debt. So that makes up about 13% of our total expenditures. Our building and department budgets make up about 11.5% of total expenditures. And then we have our fixed cost of about 3.5%. So that's our utilities, our leases, rentals, custodial services, security services. So those areas are really what drive our expenditure budget planning. And ultimately, our goal is to make sure that our revenues, our expenditures aren't outpacing our revenues. And we're working really, really hard to do that, but we're also making sure that resources are going into the hands of teachers and making sure ultimately it goes to students. So we make sure that that is definitely something that we look at as we're building our budget. So that's what I have right now for the high overview of budget. Again, it will be a more detailed presentation and you'll get into the, the line items next meeting. But are there any questions about what drives the revenue and expenditure budget planning? No? Okay. So we're going to go into the next agenda item of a state update. There's been some things that have happened in the state that have impacted school districts. It's always fun to hear the stuff coming down. So the first part is the fair funding lawsuit, which hopefully everybody is aware of and understands. And I'm also going to talk about an Auditor General report that came out about school district fund balances. So the first piece was the fair funding lawsuit update. So back in 2014, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of 6 school districts and the rest of the group, basically saying that that the state wasn't complying with state constitution to ensure all students receive access to a high quality public education. On Tuesday, February 7th, a court ruled in favor of that lawsuit and in favor of those districts, saying that there isn't an equity. So I provided you with the order to show you exact verbiage of what the court ruling was. At this time, there's a lot of talk, but there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and when actual legislation goes in or some changes happen. So it's kind of a stay tuned, but it was a very, very big win for this fair funding lawsuit that the court found in favor. They anticipate that there will be some appeals. So this is not over by far, but at least it gets the door open into saying there's some inequities. How they're going to address those inequities, we have no idea. We're staying tuned for that, and I will make sure that I keep this committee on the pulse of understanding, this process as it goes forward. And Dr. Yannicone, did you want to say anything about this?
No, I just wanted to make sure that the committee was, first of all, aware of it. And second of all, that I wanted you to know that we're aware of it and we're monitoring and having communication from the state with regard to it. I think that given the fact that we are a district, as an earlier slide indicated, we are among the wealthier districts in the state of Pennsylvania. There's been some concern expressed in the press that wealthier districts will suffer a reduction in funding. There are no indications at this point that anyone is interested in taking away resources from districts of means. The idea here is to make sure that districts who have struggled financially with regard to revenue are provided opportunities to be able to provide an equal and fair education to the students that live in their communities. So I want to just make sure that we're aware. And I wanted to see if you had any questions about it for either Kara or me.
No? Okay.
All right.
We'll move to the next state update. And this one's a little bit complex. There's a lot of information, so I'm sorry because I know that's a lot of words over the next 3 slides, but this was kind of hard to kind of summarize in 3 slides. But to the crux of it, there were 12 school districts that went through a performance audit for the period that's shown up there by the Department of the Auditor General. The overall summary of that was that by adhering to the letter of the law rather than the intent of the law, there were school districts raising taxes while holding millions of dollars in their general fund balance, is what the crux was. There were some recommendations that came out of that for each individual school district. There were some things that they talked about how they did it. So I can most definitely, if that report wasn't shared, I can share that report. It's good reading, but it's a very complex document. So ultimately, the overall thing that would impact all school districts is they're looking to recommend some changes to the General Assembly to make legislation happen to change the manner in which budget happens, to include fund balance and the way school districts are handling fund balance, as opposed to raising taxes and going for exceptions in taxes. So this slide basically talks about those recommendations. I won't go through all of them, to both the General Assembly and to the PA Department of Ed. So PASBO, if you're not familiar with it, is an organization or affiliation that is a proponent for school districts. So they work for school districts, especially on the business official end. They really advocate for school districts. Their executive director, Hannah Barrick, worked at the state for a while, and she's on the pulse and has really good relationships with them. They came out with a press release talking about this report that happened. So basically, they're saying that they agree with the Auditor General's focus on the appropriate and effective use of taxpayer funds. But basically they did a snapshot out of the 501 districts in the state. They took 12 districts and they're basically saying, let's put legislation in place based upon these 12 districts and how they're managing things, or how it's perceived that they're managing things. So PASBO basically said, you know, there has to be a better understanding of how budgets are derived, how fund balances are used, what the intent is. There could have been communication from those districts on the intent of use of fund balance. And then looking at some data that they had, because they did use old data. It was 2017, I think, to 21 is the time period that was used. But based on the 21-22 data, which is the most, it's the most current data in PDE, only 7 of the 500 school districts in Pennsylvania used Act 1 exceptions. So reading through this auditor's report, you wouldn't think that. So there were some things that PASBO came out talking about that, saying, yes, we all need to work together to figure this out, but it's not as bad as districts are mismanaging their funds by no way. And, you know, reading through that as a layperson, you might get that to say, well, why are they raising taxes when they are sitting on all this money? So in saying that, again, as Dr. Yannicone said, we wanted to make sure that you are all aware that we are aware of this, and to kind of go through our practices and how we handle kind of the things that were spotlighted in the Auditor General's report, and just our practices overall when we're budgeting and use of fund balances. So since the enactment of Act 1 legislation, as we've talked about, our increases have been consistently below the Act 1 indexes. So we have not used exceptions, and we try to continue that as a part of our budgetary process. Since I got here, our budget process includes the adoption of the opt-out resolution versus going through the preliminary budget process. So when you go through the preliminary budget process, you basically are going through that process to apply for exceptions. And again, it's a mechanism there if it's needed for those exceptions that you have. Again, historically, we have not gone above Act 1 index, so we go through the opt-out resolution process because we don't even need to apply if we historically, and that is our goal, to come under index. Obviously, if there's a situation that the district needed to look at raising taxes above the index, we would most definitely use that process. That's what it's for. But as of this time, in the way that we're trending, in the way that our budget process is, we don't need to do that. Also, one of the things that came out of the Auditor General's report is that these districts had unbudgeted transfers to the capital reserve. So in essence, that can be construed as they were trying to take money off the books to reduce what their surplus would look like after they raised taxes. That was the insinuation that came out of the report. So just so you know, transfers to capital reserve are budgeted expenditures. If you recall, we have not done it in the last couple years, but prior, there were transfers that were put in place so that we could pay for our buses. So we would budget a $400,000 transfer into our capital reserve. That would be a part of the budget process, and that would be considered an expense that was included in our budget. So we don't have unbudgeted transfers going out to take money off the books or to take expenses off the books to reduce what our surplus would look like. It would be part of the budget process if we were to do that. Use of fund balance, we've done that over past years to mitigate our tax increases. That has been something that's helped us keep us below the Act 1 index. And then on the other side, the use of fund balance, our goal is to use fund balance for non-reoccurring expenditures and unfunded state mandated programs. And that's one of the big arguments that PASBO had with the way this report came out, is that, listen, we've had some unknown state mandates come out, especially coming through COVID. We're seeing an increase in different things. Special ed costs are going up, but the state is not funding those at the same level as the increases are going up. Same with charter school reform. So districts do use fund balance and make sure that they have fund balance or assign it so that it does address those unfunded state mandated programs that you just don't know what's going to happen. And especially we've cleared COVID to a degree where we were virtual and going through that pandemic. And now that we're coming out of it, what we're seeing is our inflation rates are high. costs are high. And again, special ed costs are going up because you're having students having to have more services, not just special ed, but also mental health services and other services for non-special ed students. So that would be a use of fund balance and how we address that. We also have policy 620, our fund balance policy, and there are 2 areas that we talk about in there about our unassigned fund balance, that we won't go higher than 8%, but we won't go lower than 4%. So we like to keep it in between that spot. And if it does fall below the 4%, that there is a board directive on what we need to do to make sure that it stays at that 4%. So again, fund balance has its many uses. And again, we manage it and assign it for non-reoccurring expenditures, unfunded state mandated programs, and also to mitigate our tax increases. So that has been our use for fund balance. So we just wanted to make sure that you all knew our budgeting practices and use of fund balances as it benchmarked against that Auditor General's report and things that were in there. Are there any questions about that? I know that was a lot of information in a very short period of time, but
it is a lot, but it's really good to hear it, to have you reinforce it all. So thank you so much for sharing this with such detail.
absolutely. Okay, and our last slide is we just wanted to make you aware that we are going to go through some requests for proposals or RFP processes. Going out for RFP for services is not mandated. It's not like going out to bid for construction cost, or if like office furniture or anything else is not purchased on CoStars, and you have to go through the bid process. So services don't have to be, but it is a good practice to go out once in a while. So when you have continual vendors that you have, sometimes it makes them sharpen their pencils. You just want to make sure that it's, you know, that you're just getting the best price and the best people that are out there. So there's some areas that we are mandated to go out, and our food service management contract is one of those. So the way that works is we go out to bid, and then we have a four-year renewal option each year with our food service management contract. So we're up for bid. We're in that process right now. Sam has done a wonderful job leading that process. Bids are due March 1st. We've had a pre-bid walkthrough. Sam has had a lot of communication and contact with our building principal staff, our students, to talk about our food service program, some things that they like and don't like. She's been in contact with all the vendors that have applied. I think we have, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 or 5 that are bidding on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So again, that bid will be due March 1st. And again, it's mandated by the state that we do that. The other 2 that are coming up that we will have bids due in May, I'm working with Mr. Thorne on this, is our custodial services. We currently have Interstate is our company. And then our security services, we have APC. So we are looking to go out just to make sure that, you know, we are getting the best services, the highest quality services, and the best price all at the same time. It doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily change vendors, but we want to go out there to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, because it's been a while since these services have been bid out. The other piece that we've talked about is the architect design services, and the latest that it will be, this could be earlier, that bids will be received on this is September. This is the architect that will then design any of the renovations or upgrades that we have at our middle school. So that's the process that we're going through. Again, that's Mr. Thorne. And then piggybacking off of the architect design, once that happens, we'll have to go out for construction management services. This is all just to be transparent, to make sure, because we've had people like Dewey is our construction management service provider. Dewey's been with the district for a while. Not saying Dewey's doing a bad job or anything's bad with it, but it's just transparency to make sure that we're not getting used to it, and we're making Dewey responsible to sharpen their pencils if they need to sharpen their pencils. So that is, we have a lot going on with our RFPs over the next few months, but we wanted to make you aware, because as RFPs are, you know, as bids come in and we move forward, you will start to see board motions for approval for these services. So are there any questions on these 5 areas?
I don't have any on these. I do want to thank you for doing the due diligence so that we are responsible.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, so that is all that I had. That was a lot in a short period of time. So I was close to 9. I was trying to keep it in an hour. So I do know that was a lot of information. I did provide the slides. So you know, as you go through it, if there's, you know, any additional questions, we're always here to answer them. But right now, out of this meeting, there will be board motions in March for the $10 million borrowing. And then strap in for the March 9th meeting, because that's the big budget presentation for the committee. So any questions about anything?
No, this was very comprehensive. Thank you for giving the full picture. It was very helpful.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you being here and the other members of the committee who had to jump off a little bit early. Seeing that you are the last 2 standing, would one of you like to volunteer for Tuesday night's report? And we'll make sure that Kara has that summary to you in advance.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Unless you prefer, but I'm fine doing it.
I may be joining virtually and a tiny bit late. I'm trying to figure out some childcare and logistical issues, so it would be great to have someone who feels more confident in their timely arrival.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Terrific. So we'll make sure all the committee members get the minutes, but Kara will get details to you, Neil, so that you're ready for Tuesday night.
Sounds good. And I I try to take notes during the meeting too. So, but I do appreciate the minutes as well.
Understood. All right.
Helps prevent me from rambling too much.
Yeah, we have a long agenda Tuesday night, so that's good to hear. All right, thank you. All right, Kara, I think
That's it. Okay,
In good
thank
shape.
you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
All right,
thanks
bye.
very much. Have a great weekend.
Take care.